Welcome to Healthy Chats with the Doc to Personalize Your Wellness with Dr. Brooke Leverone. One of my favorite topics today, genetic testing and how to
Yep.
personalize your wellness, right? I mean, this is exactly how you do that.
It doesn't get more personalized than genetic testing, right, guys?
That's right. Well, doctor, give us a little overview of genetic testing and personalized healthcare, and what does that really mean from a doctor's perspective?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to know that there's actually several different areas of genetic testing, right? So there is the area of testing for disease, so things that we may do in prenatal screening for PKU disease and other issues. So there's genetic testing for diseases. There's also genetic testing that can help us understand if you can metabolize certain medications. So pharmacodynamics, how well do you metabolize certain medications? And that can help your doctor personalize which maybe antidepressant you should be on or which antibiotics that you would respond better to based on your genetics. And then there's nutrigenomics, which is a lot of what we do in the functional medicine world that really helps us understand your unique biochemistry and how you are metabolizing daily proteins and vitamins and nutrients and how that's affecting your daily wellness of hormone balancing and tissue repair and moods and energy and certainly disease prevention and other factors as well. So that's a big area that myself and obviously, with epigenetics and other functional medicine doctors utilize. And so when we look at those genes, what we're looking at is your genes are the blueprint of your body. They basically tell your body, how does this protein structure work? What is the blueprint, right? And your body can take that blueprint and then use it to make a 3D protein structure. And a lot of these 3D protein structures are what we call enzymes. And I always think of it as a big biological factory. We're one big biological factory, and we have all these assembly lines, and we have all these machines on the assembly line that convert one product to the next product. Well, these are enzymes in our body, and our DNA blueprint codes for how the body needs to build these machines or enzymes to function.
Mhm.
And so when we test for that, we can find out which machines are working well for you and which machines may not be working well for you, which is going to impact your wellness on a day-to-day basis and disease prevention, etc. So that's the big area that we look at with genetic testing and personalizing your wellness, is really looking at really diving into that personalized wellness of how is your unique biochemistry actually functioning.
Yeah, that's great. So obviously we're much more complex than just our DNA. So I mean,
Yes.
sometimes, yeah, you see companies online that says eat for your DNA or do this for your DNA. But I think, would you say the biggest difference between medical or clinical DNA and some of these direct to consumer, almost gimmicky things out there, is that they're just looking at one aspect of the patient, and where a physician looks at the total person and other biomarkers and how those biomarkers interact with the DNA? Is that a
Right.
good way to talk about it?
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of components there. I do want to. I think I need to say one other piece of information to sort of then preface the rest of what we're going to say, and because it ties into what you just asked. And that piece
Okay.
of information is what we call epigenetics. So it's not just your genes.
Okay.
That's your blueprint, but the environment, how that blueprint actually gets translated to the 3D model, is impacted by your epigenetics, your environment. And that's the food you eat, the stresses you have, the toxins
Right.
you're exposed to, if you're nurtured, your emotional wellness, all these factors, right? So we know, I always analogize it to the construction worker shows up at the job site. He reads the blueprint, and if he's well rested and is drinking his morning superfoods drink and he exercise, he's going to recognize if there's a problem, and he's going to be able to adjust for it in the final building. But if the supervisor shows up and he's hungover and he's eating a donut and smoking a cigarette, and all these things, he's not going to care, right? He's going to be like, I'll just build what it says and,
Yeah.
we'll fine, let's figure it out later, right? So that's sort of the analogy I use for epigenetics. So this is really important to understand that just because the blueprint says one thing does
Mhm.
not mean that that's how it's going to show up in the 3D model. We have to take the epigenetics into account. So to your point is that when you get your genetics done, It's
Mhm.
important to have somebody look at them and assess them, because they're going to be able to assess you and how that gene is actually showing up in you. And I don't like looking at DNA by itself. I like looking at certain blood markers
Right,
so that I can see how things are actually playing out in your body, right? I can look
right,
at
right.
homocysteine levels, I can look at methionine levels, I can look at dopamine levels, I can look at all these things that
Mhm.
are going to show me how those enzymes are actually functioning compared to what the DNA says. And then we can then put a better picture together of what's going on and then treat you accordingly. So when you get these, direct to consumer, and they're fun, right? You get these full
Yeah,
reports and they
yeah.
say like, oh, you're mostly Italian and from Africa or the Polynesian,
Yeah,
wherever. You have
yeah,
these like fun things, and then they
yeah,
say you should eat this and you should eat that, and that's great and all.
yeah.
But the challenge is that it's not really, you think it's taking you personally into account, that's your DNA, but it's not, because it's a lot more
Right,
complicated, right? You have to
right.
take your environment and these other things into account and really assess how things are functioning. And
Mhm.
then, of course, going from there, which I know we're going to talk about, but I'm going to just jump in right now, is that these direct consumer testings are not accurate. These are not meant for medical assessment. So
Right, right.
any medical professional, when we run a lab test, anything as simple as just a CBC, your complete blood count, when the lab tests it, it runs it through the machine several times to make sure
Right,
that they counted it right.
right.
You ever been like at home counting something, you're like, wait, was that right? And you have to, you have to count it
Yeah,
again, make sure that you counted it right. Same
right,
thing with the
right.
lab test. Like the machine has to run it through, make sure that they did it right, and it's all the
Mhm.
same. Um, and so it has to be validated. This is how we validate test
Yeah,
results, right?
right.
So the direct to consumer genetic tests, like the 23andMe and these other ones, they're
Yeah,
fun, they're great,
history.
they have
Mhm.
their purpose, but
Right.
it's not medical grade, so they don't validate the test. They don't run these genetics
Mhm.
through the machine multiple times in
Right,
order to make sure that you're actually getting an
right.
accurate reading. It's one pass and you're done, and then you're on.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
unfortunately, those tests have been shown to have up to an average of
Mhm.
40% error, and in
Wow,
some cases up to 90%
wow,
on some genes. The BRCA gene specifically was shown to have a 90% error rate in the African American population.
wow.
So don't use those for medical assessment, guys.
Stop.
Don't, it's like one of those things like where you're going to look at it and you're going to think that
Yeah,
it's the end of the world, and it may not be anything.
yeah,
Um, so that was a lot of information, but I think that's sort of the question that you asked. And there was all those parts, like your
yeah,
environment affects how those
right.
blueprints actually show up.
Yeah.
Additional testing will actually tell us what is going on in your body, and we can correlate that to your results. And then, these direct to consumer testings are not, they haven't been validated, so they're just not accurate. They're not recommended for um, medical assessment and diagnosis, guys. I'm sorry if you already bought one, and we're hoping for
Yeah.
that.
Well, no, I think what's interesting, and because I had to learn this too, is because I've done them all, right? There's
Right.
about 10 of them over the last 6 years that I've done. And then we'll get questions too, like, well, why did my ancestry or my 23andMe or my, whatever test that's out there now, not match my clinical test?
Right.
And I think you described it really well, is that the recreational tests, because they're so cheap, can only afford to go over the DNA one pass,
Yeah.
where I was told clinical data has to have a minimum of 100 passes, to make sure that they can read all of the DNA around each SNP
Yeah.
or mutation, because
Exactly.
that's where the beauty is in the surrounding DNA.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So it's yeah. I mean, I'm going to spare you guys the technical details, because it gets really, there's like a lot of different components into reading the DNA. It has to do with the
Right.
location of the DNA, and um, the surrounding DNA and how it's expressed, and the histone, all these things, right? But yeah, the take home there is you
Mhm.
have to read. It has to go through the machine a
Mhm.
hundred times plus in order
Right.
to make sure that we're actually picking up we're reading it correctly.
Right. So the bottom line is, or the takeaway is, recreational genomic testing is fun. It can tell you, for
Yes.
example, I always thought I was Dutch. My grandma always said, if you aren't Dutch, you ain't much. But I ended up, I'm from France, you know? So it was like, wow, okay, I
Well,
guess
but
that's
maybe
right.
you're not because these DNA tests aren't exactly right. My 23
Yeah.
my grandfather was from Italy. Like, I mean, off the boat from Italy, my grandfather, and same with my grandmother was from Ireland, off the boat from Ireland. And you can see what I look like, right, guys? And that it when I did the 23andMe, it showed that I was only 3% Italian and 75% Irish,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
I look Irish? So I'm not sure that even that part is accurate, you guys.
Yeah.
Though if you're trying to get citizenship somewhere, they will take it. So
Yeah, that's good. Well, but I think, the most exciting thing that I have seen with doctors like yourself who've been doing genetic testing for the last, well, at least 6 years that I've been associated with brainiacs like you, is that how much it's really changed your practice, and how the science of gene expression, or the science of epigenetics, is really the science of naturopathic or functional medicine, because it is a science of genes turn on and off based on their environment. Where, like you said, genetics is the blueprint, but the epigenome sits on top of the genome. And the best way that I understood it is, your DNA is written in ink. I have brown eyes, but my epigenome is written in pencil.
right.
And that you can inherit your epigenome for up to 13 generations, but
Yes.
you can change your epigenome in
Yes.
one generation by doing the right things.
Yes. That is excellent. And that kind of goes in back to the analogy of the DNA. I think that I lost you on my Instagram live, guys. So you may not have heard that question that she just asked, but basically, what is the epigenome and how do we change it? That, supposedly we inherit this epigenome and we can change this epigenome. And that has a huge effect on how we actually express these genes, right? And like you said, some of these genes are locked in place. Like, we have brown hair, we have brown eyes, we're X feet tall. Certain genes are written in pen. But a lot of genes are, controlled and regulated and turned on and turned off. And part of that is the epigenome. Now, epigenome is the DNA is, I mean, we would wrap around the planet several times if we stretched it all out to read it, right? So that's a lot of information to pack into our cells. So the way they pack it into the cells is it gets wrapped into our chromosomes, and it's tightly bound around these histone molecules. And the packaging that the DNA comes in has tags on it, if you will. And that tells the body where it needs to open and close the chromosomes in order to access that DNA. So the packaging says, okay, open me here or open me here, so the body can get into the DNA and actually read it and produce it. So that's sort of a layman's explanation of the biochemistry behind it.
Right.
And the epigenome, you inherit the tags that come on the epigenome that tells the body where to express the genes or not. So you can inherit that from your parents multiple generations down,
Right.
because it's packaged into, when your parents give you your DNA, it's still packaged into the same package, right? It's not like, you can't unravel the DNA. It still comes in the same so it's packaged in the epigenome package. We get our parents' epigenome package. But the tags that are placed on that we inherit, we can shift. So these tags are affected by environmental toxins. They're affected by your diet. They're affected by nutritional factors. And certain other genetic variances can also affect how you tag your DNA as well too. So, whether or not you can methylate, which is a really big part of the nutrigenomics that we talk about, right? How good of a methylator are you? Can you make methyl groups or not, just inherently? Because that has a big effect on how you tag your epigenome. And so if you have bad tags, you've inherited bad tags because environmental toxins and high stresses and other factors, in your parents' life and multi generations past, that's going to affect your epigenome and how you express your genes. But you can shift that by improving the diet, removing toxins, making sure you're a proper methylator, making sure that you have proper nutrients. And that will actually change the tags and the epigenome and affect how you express your DNA. And that's the same concept we were talking about earlier with the project manager showing up at the construction site. If
Yeah.
he's hungover and smoking a cigarette and eating a donut and, whatever, doesn't care, you're going to get whatever you're going to get, right? But if he's well rested and exercised and drinking his superfoods drinks, all these good things, that's going to change the expression of that blueprint and how it's going to show up in your life. Yeah.
Well, I think that is really one of the most important things that I learned. In fact, I got so fascinated by it. I'd be happy to, if anybody wants this link. I think it was 6 or 7 years ago, I watched a BBC Live video on epigenetics, and it was about two twins.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, the identical DNA, and they were separated at birth, right? It's funny, it kind of has that British humor to it. Like, if you like British humor, you know what I'm talking about. But what it talked about was that, basically you're feeding your body thoughts. There's even great studies about meditation changes your gene expression. And that a lot of this research was done in oncology, because I'll tell my personal story. So my grandmother, the only memories I have of her is in a nursing home. She had Alzheimer's. My uncle is in a nursing home with Alzheimer's. And I have the Alzheimer's genes, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
But it says like, so you have a 12% higher chance of getting Alzheimer's. But like there's a UCLA study on women and cognitive decline, which really shows epigenetics at work. So there was a study of women, and it was 100% had an improvement in cognitive function based on taking B vitamins, meditating, exercising, and bioidentical hormones. So what made me feel really good about learning this was that DNA is not my destiny, and that I have control of my health, and that what I need to do is focus on my gene expression, not what I was born with, but what I'm going to express, right?
Yes, exactly. And there's so many levels that I think you'd asked me a minute ago about how this has changed my practice. And, that's definitely one of the things is that, for me, I love what I do because I love to provide information to people and empower people to know that you don't have to settle for what's happening. You don't have to between your DNA does not dictate your future. Right. If you're going to a doctor who's telling you, well, you're in menopause and this is just how it is, you have to deal with it. No, you don't. There are options. There's all these options. Traditional medicine has a purpose, and thank God we have it.
Yes.
But they don't necessarily address you as an individual, and they don't focus on optimizing your health. They're just there to make sure that you're alive, and barely, right? So, being able to know that there are things you can do and, empower you to feel like, okay, yeah, I don't have to be victim to this situation. I have choices and I have options. And certainly knowing, because I feel like we grew up, all of us have sort of watched the evolution of DNA being a thing, right? Like, remember when they first did the DNA sequencing, however long ago that was? And we were all like, oh my God, this is it. We're going to know everything about us. And we were so convinced that that was set in stone and that was it. We had no other option. But as you spoke to, that is not correct. Like the expression of the DNA is what really matters. And your environment changes that expression, which means you have the power to affect your DNA and affect your health, which is like, I mean, how cool is that, you guys?
That's awesome.
Right? Like we don't have to be subject to what traditional medicine just tells us we have to deal with. We have the power to change things. Like always know that.
Yeah, that's so great. I mean, you have the power. It's in the years of doing this,
right? I have the power.
But it is just really so rewarding to have the privilege of supporting patients, doctors like yourself, because one of the things that is they just feel like some of them, especially in menopause, got their life back, or
Totally.
we were talking earlier about the veteran study we're working on with
Yes.
together with the county and some of the best
Yeah.
students.
PTSD and
Oh, yeah. And it's just, I know we're running a little over, but can you talk about, because this is my favorite way to explain epigenetics and why genetic predisposition is so important, is to again tie back into the B vitamins. So, not to name names or anything, but one of my business partners used a recreational genomic test.
uh,
And at that point,
right.
the doctor thought she was a methyl
EMT.
craver, but she,
No, no.
wait, she was methyl sensitive,
Yeah,
but
because
ended up being
she
a methyl
told she
craver.
had the COMT homozygous. Yeah.
Right. Will you explain that in layman's terms about
Methyl
why
craver.
taking the wrong B vitamin can be the worst thing you
Oh,
do?
right,
Right.
right. Okay,
Okay.
this is such a good point because going back to how this has changed my practice, I've all of us as practitioners and patients who have experienced this on their side of the equation, there's always individuals who they're more complicated and they don't respond to treatment the way you're expecting them to, and you're like, what am I doing wrong? Like you give them this and this is supposed to happen and then this is supposed to happen, and it wasn't happening, and there's these groups of patients where you're like, what is happening? Being able to look at the DNA helps me go, oh my goodness,
Mm-hmm.
you're either methyl sensitive or you're a methyl craver, you're a mixed type, and I need to give you the right B vitamins and the right minerals so that your enzymes, those machines that maybe your DNA blueprint doesn't code a good one, needs a little bit more help with, and that shifts everything. And I
Mm-hmm.
have seen crazy miraculous things happen with people with
Yeah.
chronic depression and chronic
Yes.
anxiety, and it's like
Yes.
gone because they got the right
Yeah.
vitamins. Women who have a hard
Yeah.
time balancing their hormones and they don't
Right.
respond well and we can't get the dosage right. Oh, it's because you're not metabolizing it right because the machines don't work. We have to give you the right B vitamins.
Right.
So it's huge. And so what that means specifically is that we were talking sort of a little bit earlier about having genes that make what are called methyl groups.
Right.
And these methyl groups have hundreds of functions in the body, essentially, one of which is regulating DNA expression. And there's a bunch of other factors too. So people can either, people will make methyl groups very well, or they may not make methyl groups very well. If they don't make methyl groups very well, then they have to supplement with the methylated form of a B vitamin in order to
Mm-hmm.
get those methyl groups, because that's important for the DNA expression. And those methyl groups then are donated to hundreds of other pathways for other
Right.
functions.
Right.
Some people, they make the methyl groups totally fine, but they have the pathways that those methyl groups are donated to maybe don't work very well, in which case they can't handle too many methyl groups. They get what's called methyl sensitive. It
Right.
creates backups in the system, and
Mm-hmm.
they can't metabolize their hormones, they're struggling with anxiety, they're really
Right.
chemically sensitive, so there's this other subset of people who become methyl sensitive because
Right.
other parts of that biological factory we were talking about has
Right.
machines that
Yeah.
actually can't handle those methyl groups. So
Right.
those are methyl sensitives. And as I mentioned before, you can have patients that are methyl cravers and they just don't make the methyl groups well to begin with and they need them. And in some cases, you can have a mix. So some people are a little bit of both.
Yeah.
And those ones are even more complicated. But when you know that information, then you understand what's going on. And
Mm-hmm.
so you can offer solutions to work
Right.
around it and make those pathways. You find the balance between, okay, we need to make sure these sensitive pathways have the support they need and only give a little bit of methyl group. And then you kind of find the happy balance to make sure that things are working. And it's crazy the things I have seen
Mm-hmm.
from this. And like you
Yeah.
said, your colleague was told that she was methyl sensitive and
Yeah.
was feeling terrible because she got
Right.
one of those over the counter tests.
Right.
And when we actually got her a validated test, she was
Right.
not methyl sensitive. She was a methyl craver. She was missing
Opposite.
those methyl groups.
Yeah.
Now she's taking methyl groups and
Right.
everything shifted and
Yeah.
everything is, it's a night and day the
Right.
effects of taking the right vitamin had on her well-being. And that's just one. I could go off on a dozen different cases right now
Yeah.
where just changing the vitamins, and it's like it's just a B vitamin. How
I,
amazing is that? Like it's
I know.
I
It's
I wish we had
fantastic,
more
really.
time
Yeah.
because I would go over cases and let
Yeah.
you guys know, but
Yeah.
it's a lot.
Well, I know we're running out of time, but
Yes.
I mean, it's just to me, it's so exciting because when if you don't have your genetics, you're a responsible doctor. You care, first do no harm. You're giving people B vitamins, and then what you're doing is they're more anxious, they can't sleep. You're kind of wrecking the whole metabolic
Yeah.
pathway. But when you
Yeah.
do genetics, it just gives you a bigger window into the patient, right? Is that the best
Yeah,
way to
a
describe
bigger
it?
window, a bigger window. And what I've seen, and I've been guilty of this too in my early years, what's
Mhm.
hard is there's a lot of functional medicine practitioners that may be just getting into this
Yeah.
and they're
Yeah.
only looking at a couple methyl craving genes and they aren't
Right.
looking at the whole picture. And
Right.
then they're like giving people tons of methyl groups, and then that's
Yeah.
creating more problems. So it's
Yeah.
it's you don't want to just look at one or two genes, you guys. You got to look at the whole picture together, and it, like you said, gives you a bigger window into what's going on. So again, really personalizing the
Yeah.
medicine. It doesn't get more personalized than that.
No, it's great. So, many more things to talk about, but an
Yeah,
exciting offering for everybody who's on either your Instagram live or
yes.
YouTube
Instagram live, the offer
YouTube
today.
live or on the call right now.
Yeah.
We've got a great offer. So we're going to make sure this is, affordable for everyone. So we're giving a $50 off the genetic test. And so you need to go to your doctor. But in order to get the coupon, what you do is it's super simple. Joe's put it in the chat comments too, but just info at epigeneticsrx.com. So info at epigeneticsrx.com. And in the subject line, just go DNA for you. So DNA, the number four, for you. And we'll make sure that we get you a $50 discount with all Dr.
Perfect.
Ledberone's patients or any of
And
the
I'll
other epi present.
Yeah, and I'll make sure we'll post this and
Okay.
make sure that you have the information on the video. So
Okay.
on the Instagram side for you guys too.
Great. Well, as always, thanks so much, Doc. Take care. Be safe. Wear your mask and be safe.
All right, thanks guys.
All
Have a
right.
good
Bye-bye.
week. Bye. See you next week.